A man rarely spends because he needs something, but because something inside him needs relief. Walk through any marketplace, not as a buyer, as an observer. Watch the hands, not what they pick up, but when they hesitate and when they do not. There is a difference, a small one, but consistent. Some purchases are quiet, measured, almost invisible. Others carry urgency, a subtle tension, a movement that feels faster than thought. The Greeks would not call these the same action. They would say one is chosen, the other is surrendered. I did not begin this experiment with discipline. I began with a question that felt too simple to matter. Why do I spend when I did not plan to? Not large spending. That would be easy to notice. Small, frequent, unquestioned. The kind that does not feel like a decision, but accumulates like erosion. At first I dismissed it. Everyone does this. It is normal. And that word, normal, is where most patterns hide. Let me ask you something carefully. How many things in your life feel normal, but have never been examined? Because normal is often inherited, not designed. The Greeks did not trust what felt normal. They questioned it. Because anything repeated without thought becomes structure, and structure shapes outcome. So I decided to observe. Not restrict, not control. Observe. For 30 days, I would track every purchase that carried emotion. Not every transaction, only the ones that felt different, the ones that came with a feeling. Stress, boredom, reward, and frustration. At first it sounded simple, but the moment I began, it became uncomfortable, because observation removes distance. The first day passed without anything obvious, or so I thought. Then I reviewed, and I noticed something. There were purchases I had already forgotten, not because they were insignificant, but because they were automatic, and anything automatic escapes memory. Let me ask you something directly. How much money have you spent this week that you cannot recall without checking? Because what you cannot recall, you cannot control. By the third day, a pattern began to form, not clear, but present. There were moments before each emotional purchase, small pauses, a thought, a feeling, a justification, then action. The sequence was consistent, but I had never noticed it. Because it happened too quickly. The Greeks would slow this down. They believed that between impulse and action, there is a space, and in that space, control is either exercised or abandoned. Let me ask you something carefully. When you feel the urge to spend, do you notice the moment before it happens? Or do you only notice after? By the fifth day, the discomfort increased, not because I was spending more, but because I was seeing more. I noticed how often spending followed emotion, not need, not plan, emotion. A long day, a small frustration, a moment of boredom. Each one carried a quiet suggestion. Do something. And that something often became spending. Not large, but consistent. And consistency builds outcomes. Let me ask you something. What emotion most often precedes your spending? Is it stress? Is it reward? Is it emptiness? Because the emotion matters more than the amount. By the seventh day, something became difficult to ignore. The spending itself was not the problem. It was the pattern. Because the pattern revealed something deeper. I was not using money as a tool. I was using it as a response. And a response means something else is in control. The Greeks would not tolerate this. They believed that a man who cannot control his response cannot build anything that lasts, because response is unstable. It changes with mood, with environment, with circumstance. Let me ask you something directly. If your financial decisions change with your emotions, how stable is your foundation? By the 10th day, awareness turned into resistance. Not intentional resistance, natural resistance. The moment before spending became louder. The pause lengthened. The justification weakened. And sometimes, the action stopped. Not through discipline, through visibility. Because what is seen clearly loses its power to deceive. The Greeks trained perception first. Because perception determines action. Let me ask you something. What would happen if every decision you made was fully visible to you in real time? Would you still act the same way? By the 14th day, the experiment changed form. It was no longer observation. It became confrontation. Because the patterns were now clear. Spending followed feeling, and feeling followed environment, and environment was often unexamined. This is where most people stop, because it becomes personal. It is no longer about money, it is about behavior. And behavior is harder to change. Let me ask you something carefully. What in your environment triggers your worst decisions? And why have you not removed it? By the 18th day, something unexpected happened. The urge to spend did not disappear, but it changed. It became visible earlier, before the justification, before the action, at the level of feeling. And that is where control becomes possible. Not at the moment of spending, but at the moment of impulse. The Greeks understood this. They did not fight action, they trained perception. Because if you control the beginning, you do not need to fight the end. Let me ask you something directly. At what point in your decisions do you attempt to apply control? At the beginning or at the end? Because that difference determines everything. By the 21st day, something began to stabilize. Not spending, awareness. There was less surprise, less regret, less confusion, because the patterns were known, and what is known can be structured. The Greeks built their lives on this principle: clarity before action, structure before expansion. Because without structure, expansion leads to collapse. Let me ask you something. Are you trying to earn more, or are you trying to understand how you behave? Because one without the other is unstable. By the 25th day, modern spending began to feel different, not wrong, predictable, as if most people were following patterns they did not see. Triggered, moved, directed, without awareness, and that is where the real imbalance exists, not in income, in control. Let me ask you something carefully. And if someone tracked your behavior for 30 days, what patterns would they see that you have ignored? By the 30th day, the experiment ended, but something remained. Not a rule, a lens. Every purchase now carried a question. What is driving this? Need or emotion? And that question changed everything. Spending reduced, not through restriction, through clarity. Decisions aligned, not through effort, through awareness. And something else appeared. Control. Not over money, over behavior. And behavior is where wealth is built. The Greeks did not separate the two, because they understood something most people ignore. Money does not create structure. It reveals it. Let me ask you one final question. If your emotions were removed from your financial decisions, how different would your life look? Because in the end, your life is not shaped by what you earn. It is shaped by how you respond. And as Marcus Aurelius wrote, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength.